Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. And once again, I have found someone who I was lucky enough to once before listen to him on a prior interview that he did on another show. And his stories are riveting. His name is Rocky Elmore. And Rocky used to be, right now he's retired, he used to be a U.S. border agent out in the area east of San Diego or in Southern California. And he's got a lot of great stories just about what he used to do for a living. But the most interesting of all are what happened to him when he was out there patrolling in really remote areas. Because I'm somewhat familiar, not really, but I've been close enough to that area where he worked out of that I can tell you there's nothing, and no one supposedly out there. And he's got the most riveting ghost stories and unusual encounters that I have ever heard of. Okay? And I'm going to bring him on, and I'm going to let him talk about a little bit about his background, and we'll go into some of the encounters that he's had. He's also written a book about it, which is a page turner. It's great. So here we go. Hey, Rocky, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Rocky, I always ask my guests, a little bit about their background so my viewers can understand, what brought you to that point or that location where you had all these experiences. So if you could give my audience a little bit of background about yourself and what you used to do out there on a regular basis.
Well, I was about 34 years old, and I had been in private business my whole life, and it just wasn't real satisfying to me. And there was just other things I wanted to do in my life, and I had heard about the Border Patrol, and I had heard that they were maybe the last law enforcement agency that knew how to sign track and do sign cutting and things like that, follow footprints, and that really intrigued me.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to learn how to do that and become part of that and do something a little bit more exciting in my life. And the cutoff age was about 35 at that time, so I got my paperwork together as quick as I could.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said, okay, I got a deadline to beat here. Okay.
I actually got in the Border Patrol 3 weeks before the cutoff date, so it was a close call for me. So off to California I went to start a new career and a new life, basically.
Okay.
First, I had to go to the academy for about 5 months back in Georgia, and then we reported back to California for another 5-month training course, all of it in the field, all of it hands-on training, no classroom.
So basically, you transplanted yourself. You weren't even familiar with this area because you were living there. You were from a totally separate state.
I was from Oklahoma. I'd grown up and lived in Oklahoma all my life.
Okay.
California was completely new for me. Culture shock. The terrain was different. Everything was new. Okay. And the job was certainly very different from anything I had done before. And that was okay with me. I liked it just fine. Okay. And things started to get interesting even on the training unit. Things began to happen. I think I had my very first experience, or a couple of them, while I was still on the training unit.
Really?
5 months at the station.
And what did you? And you know what? I've talked to a lot of people that's what they say. The first time they have a couple of experiences, it's only like in hindsight that they think, was there something more to that? Did that happen to you, or when did it occur that you realized this is unusual?
Yeah, sometimes you don't realize it for quite some time what actually happened, and then even when you do realize it as it happens, you don't realize it except for maybe the last couple of seconds of the event, because you think you're dealing with something real or somebody real, and you're going about it like you're trying to make an arrest. You're trying to catch somebody.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, that person is just gone right before your eyes. And,
it's like, yeah, and you know what? That's absolutely right. While you're thinking you're dealing with a living person, you're good. It's when you realize that it's not that you think, what was this about?
Yeah, you just don't know what to think about it at the time. You're just shaking your head and scratching it, and fear doesn't set in right off the bat, not usually, because you've got to process what happened first. You go through what they call that ODA loop, where you observe something, and then you have to decide what you observed and how to react to it. So, oddly enough, fear doesn't necessarily hit you immediately. Sometimes the fear creeps in on you later when you come to a conclusion that you have to admit was paranormal.
So let me ask you, could you tell us about those first experiences that you had? It sounds like you were, like you said, you were like brand new in this job. Could you tell us a little bit about what those first experiences were?
The first experience that I had, and these were stretched out over several months at a time, and even years, and sometimes it's not like, you go out in the field and see a ghost every time you go out.
Yeah, no, and I understand that a lot of people sometimes don't realize that stuff like this, it's only like we said, like in hindsight that you put them all together and you see some type of pattern. But anyway, go ahead.
I was on the training unit, and we had been working the night shift the whole time we were on the training unit. I was with 3 other trainees and a training officer, and we were heading out to a place called Otay Lakes, and we're going to go to the back side of the lake, in between the lake and Otay Mountain, and we were going to work a couple of trails there where some sensors had went off and try to catch some traffic that was coming down off the mountain. And these were usually, in those days, this was 1995, I believe.
Okay.
The traffic was heavy, and the groups were large. So we're looking at a group, at least 40 people, and maybe 65 or 70 people. That was
that big? That many people?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And we would do that 3 or 4 times a night.
I bet you guys...
That large 3 or 4 times a night.
You guys must have really been busy then.
Oh, we were busy. We were very busy.
So this is what your regular duties at that time were. Basically, yeah. Finding 40 to 60 people.
Used to that. Now we had the luxury that we had a training officer with us, and there was 3 trainees. Now normally, once you got off the training unit, you would be by yourself or with one other person if you could get somebody to come help you. But we were actually, quite lucky in that there was 4 of us to work this group.
Oh, I can't. You know what? When you just said that you were lucky if you got some other person, and at times you were by yourself. That's like, oh. But anyway, let's keep going with your story. It's great. Keep going.
Well, as we got out to Otay Lake, we did notice that there was a supervisor out there setting up to run a night vision scope. Now, in the old days when I first got in, these scopes were they saw heat. They didn't magnify the ambient light like they do today and show you a picture of the person. They just show you a heat signature. And you can actually see quite clearly to an extent with this heat signature. But a heat signature will pick things up whether it can be seen with the naked eye or not. So if it produces heat, it will be seen, whether you actually see it or not. And we noticed this supervisor was setting the scope up, and that was good because we were counting on him to help us. But there was also 3 or 4 other groups coming off other parts of the mountain that were as big as the group we were working. So we were looking at 200 and 300 people coming down off the mountain in groups of 40 and 50 at a time.
That's incredible.
And we were going over to work our group, which was back to his west, and we went into a really remote area at the backside of Otay Lake, and there was heavy fog. We'd gotten out, we were hiking around, and the training officer got lost in the fog. We couldn't find the trail we were trying to work. We couldn't recognize any landmarks because the fog was too thick in our area. So we were just wandering around aimlessly for the most part, and decided that, well, we may as well just go back and follow the little creek that leads into the lake, and then just follow the lake around over to the dam, and maybe we'll get lucky and run into something. And that's what we were doing. We were paralleling a little creek that fed into the lake when we heard a very large splash, just a single splash, and everyone immediately knew that it wasn't people. There were no follow-up splashes. There was no thrashing of the water. It sounded like something as heavy as a car fell out of the sky and crashed into the water. It was that loud.
In other words, this was not a group of people like you were describing that usually was out there.
And we all knew it immediately. We all knew it. Now, when you're walking around trying to catch people, you're trying to be as as stealthy as you can. So we're not using flashlights. We're not talking out loud. We just look at each other and at the creek, and everyone knows to go over there. We start heading over there, and the training officer takes the way, leads the way. And before we get to the creek, he draws his weapon, which is pretty unusual because we haven't identified a threat yet, and there's 4 of us together, so why would he already be scared? Why would he already be that concerned to draw a weapon? But he did. Well, within just a second or two, I started getting these foreboding thoughts just running through my mind that was out of, they were not coming from me. They were being projected onto me. Like there was something in the area projecting very, very negative emotions and thoughts onto me. And it was foreboding thoughts of a being that was hopeless and doomed.
Really?
And it was very, very strange. And
you recognize, like you said, this is not coming from me. This is not me being morbid.
Yes, because we're not going to scare too easy at this point.
Oh, sure. You couldn't do that job if you.
We've been out there for 5 months every night doing this, and 4 of us are together, so we're not going to spook too easily. Well, I kept it to myself. I didn't say anything, but I couldn't shake that thought. And I thought, man, when we get to that water, we're going to see something that's really bad. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be bad. And I didn't know what the other 2 trainees were thinking at that time, but I knew what I was thinking, and I knew what the training officer had done. So I'm figuring that they're probably a little disturbed as well.
Okay.
We get up to the water, and there's 4 or 5 coyotes on the bank of the water.
Okay.
Now, in the Border Patrol, coyotes of the canine variety are known as a PA's best friend, and a PA is a Border Patrol agent. That's short for patrol agent.
Okay.
I say coyotes are a PA's best friend because anything that crosses their turf, those coyotes are going to go off like a guard dog. They'll be yelping all over the place.
Like an alarm system, in other words.
Like an alarm system, just like sensors. And we would just go over to where the coyotes are yelping and start looking for sign and people.
Okay.
And it's successful. But these coyotes were quiet, and they weren't letting out a peep, and they were scared. And they were walking up and down the side of the creek bank. They were very antsy. And they were looking in the water. And that's what we were doing. We were focused where we heard that splash. We walked right up to the edge of the water, and the coyotes were standing right next to us. I'm talking like 2 feet away from us.
And wasn't that an unusual in and of itself that these animals are scared, that they're not scared of you guys, they're scared of something else?
Right, because normally they would have took off out of there. And we wouldn't have got that close because I don't want to get bit by a wild animal and get rabies shots. But nobody was worried about it. We walked up. We weren't worried about those coyotes being there, and they weren't worried about us being there. We were all worried about what was in that water. And I could very, very faintly hear something moving around very slowly out in that water. Now, it wasn't deep water, and it wasn't very far across.
Okay.
So we could see all the way across the creek. We could easily see all the way across it, and nothing was there. Even where we could hear the sound, there was nothing visible. And
oh, God.
The one thing agents always do when they can't figure something out is start looking for footprints. So we did. We're looking all up and down the side for footprints, and there's no footprints of anything going into the water and nothing coming out. And the coyotes continued to dance around nervously for a couple more minutes. And then they just got out of there. They all left. They had their tails tucked, their ears down, and they just walked away.
So let me ask you, how long did this was this 10 minutes, 15 minutes? How long did this take from the moment you heard that splash till finally it kind of it sounds like it receded, like you said, that the coyotes took off? How long did that take?
I'm not sure how long totally it took, but it would have took 5 to 10 minutes. It took us a little bit to walk over there. We were probably a couple of 100 feet away. We didn't run over there. We walked over there quietly and slowly. And then we looked for quite a while with the coyotes there. Then they left, and then we looked for some more time. So this whole scenario probably took 10 or 15 minutes. because we didn't want to give up. We were convinced something's there, and we wanted to find out what it was.
Yeah.
So
I want to find it, but not really. But yeah,
yeah. So we didn't give up on it too quickly. Now, the movement that I heard was moving to the east, and it was going to follow. If it followed that creek, it was going to walk right out in front of where that supervisor had set up that night vision scope. So when we gave up looking for this thing,
okay,
we knew that it was going to walk right out in front of that scope in, probably 15, 20 minutes, something like that. And the scope operator would pick it up, and then other agents would be able to come in and work it, because there were other agents already over in that area. So we just gave up on it and went on about our patrol and headed west toward the lake.
Okay.
And about 20 minutes later, just like we thought, we heard the call, went out over the radio. The supervisor called a couple other agents in to work some traffic. Now, we had not put out what happened to us on the radio at that time, so nobody knew what had happened to us.
Okay.
And during the meantime, one of the other trainees asked me in private, he said, "Hey, what do you think that was in the water?" I said, "I don't know, but I had really bad vibrations off of it back there." And he said, "Yeah, I know. All the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight out."
So everybody in that group had a similar experience to what you felt when that happened.
Yes, they did. So that was, because that let me know that everybody knew something was up. And
so
and
all of you had that universal alarm go off in your human bodies going,
Everyone had the alarm go off. Everyone's hair was standing up. Everyone knew it wasn't people. And we just had no idea what it was, but it was disturbing. It was something that bothered us.
Let me tell you something. The fact when you described that thing of what happened with the coyotes, to me, that's like when these animals are so scared of whatever that was that you guys sensed, that tells me it was something that is normally, I think, outside of what they're used to, in that habitat. So,
right. Something that they couldn't deal with either, because had it been a bear or a mountain lion, they would have went off. Mm-hmm. They would have yelped. They would have ran away. They would have tried to circle it. They would have reacted to it, because that's something that they do deal with,
Right.
This let us know that this was also something that they had not dealt with before either. So the supervisor called these other two agents in to work some traffic that was coming down a different part of the mountain. And it was just about in the area where we figured this thing would be by now.
Okay.
These guys, two agents, got out to work the traffic, and into it, the supervisor suddenly called them off and said, "You two guys need to get back in your vehicles and leave the area." And the agents didn't want to do it. He hadn't given them an explanation why. They thought they heard the group coming down and they wanted to finish their job.
Right.
And again, the supervisor told them, said, "No, you've got a very large predator following you. You need to get back in your vehicles and leave the area right now." And they did that. They did what they were told.
Okay.
And the supervisor said, "Well, it's a very large predator. It could be a mountain lion or something." And
what they could see, this is because you're saying they're seeing something, but they don't know really what it is either.
Well, the agents that were out on foot working the traffic, they didn't see it at all. That's why they didn't want to leave. They saw nothing.
Okay.
Only the supervisor saw something, but what he saw, he was seeing with the heat-seeking scope. Oh. So everyone that was using only their eyes saw nothing, but the scope operator using the heat-seeking scope, he was the only one that was able to see anything. So that was kind of it kind of blew over. The next night we come in and reported for duty, and the supervisors brought the subject back up again because they wanted to warn everyone. They said there's a very large predator in the area. Last night it was following two agents, and it could have been a mountain lion or something, but they never said it was a mountain lion. They just said it could have been a mountain lion or something. Said if it was the largest one we've ever seen. But if you're told to leave an area, you need to leave it and don't ask questions. Mm-hmm. And that was the talk. of the station for a few days was, wow, some mountain lion followed these guys around, and and then it died off, and that was the end of it.
Let me ask
Now,
you, and I want to interrupt you real quick.
sure.
How often had Border Patrol agents been attacked by predators, like a mountain lion? Was that common or no?
We had never been attacked by mountain lions or predators, but we did encounter them all the time.
Right.
So this wasn't something that you would normally necessarily stop working for.
Okay, that's where my question was leading. The fact that he had actually mentioned that and the way it was handled, this was not the norm, because I'm thinking even predators, usually they go if they see a man coming around humans, they like go in the other direction, unless I guess you corner them or something, but so this was not normal. I mean, I understand that he was giving them a warning because he himself wasn't sure what it was, but...
Correct. And mountain lions actually, I guess a mountain lion, if he was hungry enough or had rabies, would stalk a person. And in our area, they did get used to people, and they did kill people and take them.
Oh.
But they won't do it with two people together usually. It's very rare. So these two agents were together, so this was... if this was cat behavior, it was extremely, extremely rare cat behavior.
Okay.
And after a couple of days, the story died down.
Okay.
3 or 4 months later, this supervisor got another job back east somewhere, back in the eastern part of the U.S., and he was leaving the Border Patrol. And then he told a few people what he had actually seen that night on the scope at Otay Lakes. And I was told this by about 3 different agents at different times. So I have no doubt that the story is legit.
Right.
But this supervisor said he's seen some kind of bipedal creature coming up out of the Otay River. And it walked over and it started stalking the agents, and the agents were oblivious to its presence. He said he's seen the heat signature. It was a massive, massive heat signature. He said it towered over both the agents, said it dwarfed them. Said it was bigger than any bear could have been, which we did not have. We did not have bears in our area.
Right.
Had bears in our area, but he described it as a Bigfoot type creature, probably 10 to 12 foot tall. He said it was incredibly massive, and yet it was following the agents right behind them, step for step, and they're totally unaware of it.
And you're thinking, how could they miss something this huge?
How could they miss it? Now, I remember the night this happened. Now, I can't tell you if it was a full moon or not, but I can tell you it was a very light night, and we could see quite well. And we were within 15 feet of this thing, and we didn't see it either, but we could see everything else around us. We could see those coyotes pretty easily.
Okay.
We could see the trees and the bushes pretty easily, but we couldn't see that creature. And these 2 agents at scenario number 2, they could not see that creature either. But the man operating that scope, and he was a very, very good scope operator, he saw it very plainly and in pretty good detail.
So in other words, it was giving off heat. That's why he could see it, because it was giving off heat.
It was giving off a massive amount of heat. Now, and this absolutely would not be somebody in a monkey suit, because if somebody was in a monkey suit, it would actually give a smaller heat signature because the suit itself would be containing some of the heat.
Right, would cover the actual body source. The heat source from the body inside, right?
So this was a flesh and blood creature, at least in that time frame. What was presenting itself was producing a lot of heat. It was real.
The first thing that comes up, because I'm going to ask you more questions. This to me is like way out there, but I love it. The first thing that comes to my mind is, that movie Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yes.
Where you've got this thing stalking them, and they can't see it, but it's huge, and it's there. And if, of course, if they would have known what they were looking for with heat sensors, they would have seen it. And that's the first thing that came to my mind. But then I'm thinking, okay, Marlene, calm down. And I'm thinking to myself, but what else? Because, like you said, you're in the middle of nowhere, okay? What he saw, the measurements are like, even like you said, even if somebody was wearing a suit, besides the heat signature, how could somebody be that big, and be stomping out there in the dark? And of course, the thing that none of you saw it. That to me is incredible.
Right. And why would they be out there in the dark?
Why would they
don't know that we're going to find them. What if we didn't come across them?
Exactly.
Because somebody wearing a monkey suit out there at night, they wouldn't know if they're going to encounter us or not. And if they were, we would see somebody in a monkey suit. We would have seen that right off the
Yeah.
bat easily.
Let me ask you.
And somebody in a monkey suit would not have been able to get through the water like that either.
No, no, no. If you wanted to go in that direction, how about smells? Was there any unusual smells or anything like that?
No, there wasn't, and that's something that I hear is quite common with a Bigfoot encounter is
Mm-hmm.
a very strong odor. There were no smells that I was aware of that I remember at all. What really caught my attention was that strong sense of foreboding. It was a very depressing, negative feeling that I have never had in my life, and I don't want to have it again.
Let me ask you, and I know, like, we talked earlier, sometimes people, when they've had these experiences, they kind of keep it to themselves for whatever reason. Did you ever hear of anybody before or after you guys had that experience having something similar happen to them?
Yes. Now, when this was over, we never spoke a word to each other about it.
Okay.
All these years later, to this day, I have not spoken with any of those other participants about this at all. Several years later, I tried to bring the subject up with one of them, and he didn't want to go there.
It's like,
He had promoted into management,
Yeah.
so he had a lot to lose, and so I just never brought it up with anyone again.
Sure.
Never. So, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Well, no. Like you said, you were there for a while. Did you ever hear, like, through the grapevine, hey, either before you guys, or after you guys had this experience, did anybody ever have a similar kind of, either in that same area or where the same thing where nobody could see it, but there was something out there?
No one that I know of had one where they could not see it, but they proved that something was there. Now, the only reason this became a Bigfoot encounter for me or any of us was because that scope operator was there to verify it.
Right.
Had he not been there and seen that, this wouldn't even be a story. It would just be something weird happened. I don't know what it was, and we went about our business.
Yeah, I had a bad feeling, and that's it.
Yeah, that happened 200 or 300 times while I was there.
What?
I never talked any of them up to Bigfoot experiences because there was nothing there to verify them. But I did hear of other Bigfoot experiences over the years. Not a lot of them, and not in near as much detail as my own because a lot of happened to me. And I've heard actually quite a few of them, and most of those guys kept them to themselves for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the book come out, they would contact me and say, well, did you know about the Windmill Monster? Well, I had only heard about one story about what was called the Windmill Monster, which was the
Windmill Monster?
Windmill is the name of a canyon.
Okay.
It's a Windmill Canyon on Otay Mountain. And you can actually Google a map and you can find these places for yourself.
Okay.
You can find Windmill Canyon and look at it and see what it looks like yourself. But yeah, I've been contacted a couple of times and say, hey, did you hear about the Windmill Canyon Monster? Well, I did, but when I did, it was long before any of those guys were ever in the Border Patrol. And the story I heard about was completely different from the ones they were telling me. So they thought they had an original Bigfoot story in Windmill Canyon.
Okay.
In reality, I had already heard Bigfoot stories in Windmill Canyon 5 or 6 years before they even got into the Border Patrol from people they didn't even know.
So yeah, and that exactly, it wasn't like this was something I heard. This was their own original experience.
This was their own original experience, and some of them did involve a Bigfoot-type creature chasing groups of illegal aliens while they were crossing.
And you got ahead of me because I was about to ask you, did you ever pick up any group of immigrants, of illegals running around out there that were saying that, like, hey, yeah, take us quick because there's something out here that we're scared of?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And what did they describe? Or were they kind of in the same thing where they didn't actually see it, but they felt like there was something out there that was hunting them?
Well, the stories we got from them was that they saw it.
Oh, yeah?
Except for one. The very first story that I was aware of concerning a group of illegals being chased and harassed by a creature was at Windmill Canyon, and I was there with the training officer, and it was the very last, I think it was the last day we were on duty as trainees. It would have been just a couple, 3 weeks after my own experience. And the training officer, a different training officer, was telling me about a group he had run into a few weeks earlier, and they were all huddled up under some bushes down in Windmill Canyon, and they were yelling and screaming. What had happened was they had come up on the south side of the mountain, crossed over the peak of the mountain, and dropped into Windmill Canyon on the north side of the peak.
Okay.
And he was tracking them and following them. And as he got up to the peak, he could hear them screaming down in the canyon. So now it was at night at that point.
Okay.
He turned on his flashlight and he ran down there as quick as he could. It was one of the few times that we actually used a flashlight, or he did. And he ran down there, and they were all huddled up together under some bushes, and they were just screaming hysterically. And they started to talk about a beast that had attacked them up on top of the mountain when they were going over the peak, and chased them down into the canyon. And the poor guy that was running at the end of the group, he said, I could feel its hot breath breathing down onto the back.
Oh my God!
As he chased us. But by the time the agent showed up, the creature was gone, and this became a theme. People seeing the creature, seeing the monster, and then instantly it just disappears into thin air with no footprints, no nothing. And there's several stories like that.
Now let me ask you, that terrain, and like I said, I'm kind of familiar, but is that like open terrain? I mean, do they have a lot of trees or places to hide, or is it just like brush and maybe what is that terrain out there like?
Now, at this time, the mountain had not burned off. In about 1996, Otay Mountain burned off in a wildfire, and it wiped all the vegetation out of all the canyons except for 2 or 3 canyons. But at this time, the entire mountain range was covered in what they call manzanita bush, and sometimes I've heard it referred to as ironwood.
Okay.
This stuff is incredibly dense, and it's very, very tough. This will punch right through your skin. It will punch completely through your leg. It will punch into a ballistic vest. If you were to break a stick off and run into that stick, it would punch right into a vest.
Okay.
And it would go through both sides of your leg quite easily.
Ooh, yeah.
This is some tough stuff. Now, these trails are very, very narrow, because once you get on a trail, you can't get back off because the brush is too heavy. It's too thick. So there's only certain points where you can get onto and off of a trail. So that creature was in between the group and the agent on one of these kind of trails, and there's no way off of it. And yet the agent didn't run into the creature.
So where'd it go, right?
And the agent was only, he was within 15 to 20 seconds running time behind the group, but there was no creature in between them.
That's incredible. That is incredible. Did you guys ever find either the remains of human or animals that it was like, what happened to this thing or to this person that you guys couldn't account for? Did you guys ever find anything like that out there?
There were several bodies we found that usually were attributed to mountain lion kills. Mountain lions kill in a very specific way. Okay. And I believe all of those were mountain lion kills. But there was one body found up on what's referred to as the KOA ridgeline, and it was a female, and she was missing her head. Ooh. Now, the agents, I'm not claiming that this was paranormal, but people have asked me about this. Okay. The agents that were at the scene said they thought she had been killed with a machete, and that's why her head was gone.
Oh, God.
Now, the sheriff's department and some of the Border Patrol management claimed that the woman died of natural causes somehow, and her head just came up missing. Well, that's so,
I was like,
That's quite a difference in stories. Natural causes, and her head just fell.
Yeah,
off.
I know. I was gonna say that's.
I just carried it off, and agents at the scene thought it had been cut off. Been taken with a machete.
Okay.
Now, I've had some people say, well, a Bigfoot would do something like that. I don't know. I'm not going there. I didn't see the body. I wasn't at the
Right. So
scene.
you don't know if it's. I mean,
Murders were common. Getting killed with a machete was very common on Otay Mountain.
Is it?
Yeah. When these, this is highly organized crime, and people don't realize, you're dealing with things that are equivalent to, terror cells and
Exactly.
cartels, and you're dealing with very, very serious people. And when you get crossways with them, if you're a smuggler, and let's say that you're a foot guide, you are only allowed to work a canyon or certain trails, and that's what you are allowed to work because you've paid for that, or you're sponsored for that, or something. If you start freelancing and get over into somebody else's canyon, you're going to pay for it with your life.
It's like, yeah, get out of my turf,
Yeah. And it's not going to be like a warning. We're not going to talk about it. They're just going to find your body there, What? So, that was something.
Oh, no. And you know what? And let's face it, like you said, who's going to witness it? You don't have to worry about cameras up on a pole who are going to capture you doing something like this. And...
Talking about an area back then that was so remote that nobody's going to come out and investigate the crime, and the Border Patrol doesn't investigate murders. The federal government does. Well, I guess the FBI would, but that was out of our jurisdiction, investigating a murder. But if it's so close, if it's something that's known to be human trafficking or drug trafficking, and it happens right on the border, 10 feet inside the U.S., you're probably going to have a hard time getting anybody interested in finding out what happened.
I imagine just even identifying who the person is to begin with has got to be like, okay,
Yeah. And especially back then, you probably can identify them. And matter of fact, when this lady lost her head, there was, I believe, a male companion with her who was also no longer with us, and he was missing his hands, if I remember right. And, of course, the reason for that would be so he couldn't be identified. So, this wasn't something, I'm pretty sure that those people didn't die of natural causes.
No, and I'm going to segue a little bit into this because this story that you were talking about, this creature, to me is absolutely fascinating. But what you're describing, and these are the remains of people that you guys actually found. I'm sure there was people that were killed out there that their remains they were never found, and of course became skeletonized and just became nothing. And I guess my point is that those areas, from a paranormal point of view, they become entrenched with just the bloodshed, the murder, and of course, if you have any of these victims that were stuck out there, with some of the traditional reasons why people, you have ghosts, which are, I got killed, nobody knows where I'm at, or seeking justice because they were taken out there and basically, not only killed, but killed so horrifically, and...
Yeah. It's not going to be easy death up on the mountain. No matter how you go, if it's from heat stroke, from rattlesnake bite, from being murdered, from mountain lion attack, it's not going to be an easy death. It's going to be a very traumatizing death.
No, it sounds like, even when you were describing about those trees, I was like, okay, I'd be like walking around so carefully. You even have to be careful with the plants or with the brush or whatever is out there. So here you had this experience, which is like interconnects with all the other things that are going around it, which is the illegal trafficking of humans, or whatever's going on there, possible murder of people, the danger to yourselves. And it sounds like you were always out there, at nighttime? Was that like your usual schedule?
2/3 of your shifts would be night. We rotated, in those days, every 6 weeks.
Uh-huh.
So you would get 6 weeks of a day shift, kind of rest and recuperate and learn the area. it was actually very important to have assignments during day shifts so you could see what the terrain looked like in the daytime. So you could take note of cliffs and different terrain features so you could find your way around and not get injured so easily. But then, yeah, you would do 2/3 of your shifts would be a night shift. It'd be a swing shift or a graveyard shift. So most of your time you're out there at night.
So you mentioned also earlier that you hardly use any light or flashlights. So it sounds like you guys were going in the dark, or like you said, if you had any ambient light from the moon or, anything like that. And now you said cliffs, and I'm like, I mean, how dangerous was that when you were out there at nighttime if you really weren't sure where you were at or anything like that?
We lost 2 agents.
Okay.
Were killed from falling off cliffs.
Oh.
Just from walking around, falling off cliffs, were killed. I know several of people crossing illegally were killed by falling off of cliffs.
God, that's got to be so horrible.
Countless people were very seriously injured by falling off smaller cliffs and things like that. So the terrain itself was a killer. It was responsible for numerous deaths, whether it was Border Patrol agents or illegal groups crossing. The terrain itself was the major killer in that area.
So, in other words, like this is incredible, because it sounds like, almost like every time you went to work, part of it was surviving of the where you were working in.
All you had to do to suffer heat stroke and die would be forget to take your canteen with you.
Really?
Because I learned that every single time you got out of the vehicle, you better have your canteen with you. Even if you're just going to step out and look around and you don't intend to go anywhere. Because you never know what's going to happen. There was many times when I got out of the vehicle just to maybe look for footprints to cut sign across the road or something,
right.
And then run into a group of people crossing illegally, and then them take off running. Well, now you're in a foot chase that lasts for 3 or 4 hours.
And you better have your water with you then, right?
And you forgot your water. Your water's back of the truck, and it's 95 degrees outside.
Oh.
And you've ran downhill into a canyon 2,500 feet deep, and there's no way to get back out but hike back up at 2,500 feet, and you don't have any water. Well, you can perish real quickly doing stuff like that. You're going to have to call for a rescue. And we did. We rescued agents all the time who
going down is easier, but once you're down there, that's the problem, right?
You got to get back, and there was no roads, and there's nowhere for a helicopter to land. Sometimes we had to call the Coast Guard out and have a winch lowered down. Uh-huh. And these were guys who sometimes had water with them. It just wasn't enough.
And let me ask you, like you said, you had falling off the cliffs, or what was it? Just that people would lose their ways, or they didn't know exactly where they were at, and they didn't know that maybe 3 feet over there was nothing but air. I mean, how did these things happen? In both cases, with Agent Santiago and Agent Starch, in both cases they were ruled accidents due to lack of evidence. Okay.
But also in both cases, throughout the years, there have been people coming forward saying, I seen that agent get shoved over.
Really?
They were never able to prove anything, never able to come to any conclusion, because once again, you're in such a remote area.
Of course.
Who's going to see, Somebody, maybe someone you're looking for is hiding in a bush and you haven't found them yet. And you're looking down at the ground a little bit too long for footprints, and they just pop out and give you a quick shove, and you're over, and it's over that quick. You're not going to call on the radio what happened, because you're free falling through the air.
How tall? How many feet are we talking when they fell? How big or how deep were those drops?
Santiago fell 120 feet to his death.
Oh. Okay.
And Agent Starch fell 150 feet to his death.
Wow.
And then there was Agent Sullivan was in a vehicle and was hauling prisoners down after completing a midnight shift. And one of his tires went over the edge of the road. The road on the mountain was a single lane road, very narrow, very treacherous, very steep sides. And for whatever reason, one of his tires went over the edge, and it pulled the whole vehicle over the edge, and he went down 1,200 feet.
Also with a truck full of people.
Yes, and everybody on board was killed.
Oh, my God. Let me tell you something. I mean, I've gone driving sometimes in mountainous areas where it's like the two lane, one lane up and one lane out, especially when you're on the outside lane. And even then, I'm like, and these are regular roads which are like paved, and sometimes they have the rails. And even then, I'm like sweating bullets because I do a lot of the driving. So I'm thinking to have been driving on a one lane road that's in the dark, where in the middle of nowhere. Oh, my God. I would have been, okay, guys, we're waiting here till the sun comes up. I'm not. I mean.
Well.
I know. I'm looking at it.
I knew a few guys that they were very nervous about driving up there like that. And there were a couple of spots in the road on that mountain back then that were very exceptionally treacherous. And, normally everyone wears their seatbelt, but there were spots that were so bad in the road back then that when you got there, you took your seatbelt off.
Okay.
And the logic was if you go over the side here with a fastened seatbelt, you're doomed. Mm-hmm. Because now when Agent Stark's vehicle went over the edge, two or three prisoners did survive.
Oh, yeah.
And the way they survived was when the vehicle hit on its top the first time going over, it blew the back window out.
And they got out.
Threw those three guys out. It threw them out. Everybody else that was stuck in the vehicle obviously were killed. So that was something we all learned from that accident. When I got to certain areas, the seatbelt came off because that was the only chance I had of getting out alive, was to hope that I just got thrown out of the vehicle and then it didn't run over me and kill me,
Right, yeah, because, most people, they wear the seatbelts in order not to get ejected out of a car. But in this case, you're like, I'm hoping that if I have to, I am going to be able to eject myself out of the vehicle.
You're hoping you get ejected because that's your only chance.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's almost runs contrary to what the reason for wearing a seatbelt is at. So here you are, you spent all these years, working out there, having all these encounters. What would you say was some of the things that even now, whether when it was you were having the experience or afterwards, that you would say were some of the most disturbing and that you can't account for? And by this, but sometimes people say, what was the explanation? Sometimes you have experiences for you can't never explain it. You can describe it, but you could never say this is the origin or this is why that happened.
Yeah, when I started writing the book, I tried to do a little bit of research on some of the apparitions that the agents were reporting.
Okay.
And, of course, like I said, when you're talking about this close to the border, there's not a lot of information. And especially when things happened 100, 200 years ago, there's almost no information to be found about it.
Okay.
I really think that most of the ghost and the spiritual activity going on that mountain is not related to immigration, not related to people crossing the border illegally, with the exception of Agent Santiago. That was a very unique case. The other spirits that people ran into and apparitions seemed to be something that was far older than this immigration problem going on.
Right, that predated all this human trafficking back and forth and stuff like that. And now, let me ask you, and I'm going to interrupt you real quick because you sound like what they were seeing, what makes you think, because was it the appearance of what they saw?
Well, one of the first things I heard before I even started hearing about these encounters was in the Border Patrol is kind of like the military. The guys come from everywhere. So 90% of the guys that were working in San Diego, guys and gals that were working in San Diego, 90% of them were not from San Diego. They were from somewhere else. So when you got a chance to talk to an agent who actually grew up there, you could get extra information from them.
Okay.
Like they had already heard about Bigfoot in the area, and they called it the Proctor Valley Monster, which was less than a mile from where I had my encounter.
Oh.
One of the other agents told me, he said, well, you know that the Otay and Takati mountain range, they're sacred. That's one. I guess that's one of the reasons they belong to Bureau of Land Management. It said these ranges are sacred, and the Indian tribe, the Kumeyaay, it said they say it's forbidden for human beings to go up there because there's these very evil spirits that inhabit the Otay and Takati Mountains, and if you go up there, you'll get them all stirred up, and it's forbidden for human beings to go up on this range. Well, of course, that's where our traffic was, so that's where we had to go.
It's like I don't have a choice. That's
So,
and it's the thing because most people would listen to those tales and they think, oh, that's like traditional or Native American stuff. Because most people don't have the chance to have an experience like you were because this is where you worked.
right. So when I started hearing about some of these apparitions being seen, and one of them was this little girl in white, little 3-year-old girl in white, and she was by far the most disturbing apparition anybody saw. Now, lots of agents saw ghosts at one point or another, myself included, and it never really had an effect on us, other than it was just, it was just kind of a sideshow. Well, I ran into this ghost. It was almost kind of funny. It scared me for a moment, but it didn't keep me from going out to do my job.
Okay.
When people ran into this little girl in white, all of them said that it left them emotionally distraught, that they were depressed over it. It had lingering effects on them and feelings.
Really?
One guy actually quit his job over
what?
Girl.
That's okay. And do you think that it was because it was a child, or because just contact or having seen it just caused this feeling in people?
This little girl, and I don't know if it's a combination of the perceived innocence of a child or what, but this little girl, she scared people.
I bet.
And it was a combination of fear and sadness mixed together. They certainly didn't want to encounter her again when they did. One story come to me from an agent who was very senior. I mean, this guy had 20 plus years in when he saw her. Maybe 25. So this guy is not going to spook easy. And, it's not something nothing's going to bother him very easy because he's seen everything. Right. And he had a trainee with him one night, and they were parked out in one of these remote areas, and people can look it up if they want. It was the intersection of Chicken Ranch Road and the Otay Truck Trail.
Okay.
It's very remote, one lane dirt road, both roads, and there's a large tree there. I believe it's an oak tree, sits right at the corner. And they were parked there one night about 3:30 in the morning, and all of a sudden they just kind of got a very weird feeling. They started looking around, and their attention was drawn to that tree, and there was that little girl under that tree.
Oh,
and
crap.
He said she had a very slight glow to her. All of them said well, not all of them. Many of them said there seemed to be a glow about her that was unnatural.
Okay.
And this little girl was just staring at them. She was just standing there under that tree all by herself in this extremely remote area, just staring right at them.
Oh, my God.
And they just froze. They didn't do anything. They knew right off the bat she wasn't alive. And they just looked back in amazement. And, after 10 or 15 seconds, she was gone.
And was she always seen in that particular area, or was she sighted in different locations?
She was seen all over the place. And this is something else that's very unusual about the apparitions that was seen in Otay Mountain, was that they roamed. They were not just seen in the same place all the time. They might be seen 2 and 3 miles away.
Really?
And another... I'll tell a couple other stories, the most disturbing stories about this little girl that I heard.
Okay.
That really just sent shivers up my spine.
I bet.
One was an agent was going down Morone Valley Road one night. Now, Morone Valley Road was about a mile from where the intersection of Chicken Ranch Road and the Otay Truck Trail is. And where the Otay Truck Trail crosses Morone Valley Road, just south of there, there's a gate, a metal gate. And the scope operator had been assigned to go down in the south end of Morone Valley Road and work some traffic on a midnight shift, and he had not heard anything about this little girl.
Okay.
And he showed up, he's driving south, and he showed up at this gate probably about 1:30 in the morning, and he got out of his scope truck and he walked over to the gate to open the gate, and right before he got to the gate, that little girl was there, met him at the gate.
Oh.
And she didn't have a face.
Oh,
this time he was faceless. And he started trying to backpedal and get away from her, and she followed him.
Yo, see, see, that's like, is that the guy that quit? Because I think that's that. I'd be like, okay, sirs, this is my letter of resignation.
Well, I was told this story by someone in mid-level management.
Really?
So someone that would have taken his resignation. Okay. You know, this is the kind of person that would have taken his resignation.
Okay.
And he said he was just terrorized, and he ran back to his truck scared out of his wits, trying to get away from her. And when he left the area, he was so shook up he wrecked the truck.
Who wouldn't?
He had it wrecked the truck.
It's like, what? And you know what?
So,
and it's, I can imagine, because of all the things that you're out there tuned out for, is like you're trying to track human beings, and the last thing you expect is you're going to find yourself in a situation like this.
That. Right in the middle of working traffic, something like this happens. And so he went right back to the station. He was done for the night.
I bet. I'd be like, I'll be right back. I got to go to the bathroom. I'll be back.
3 days later, he turned in his resignation. He said, "I'm done. I don't want to see that girl. I'm not going to risk seeing that little girl again." And he packed his stuff up and he was done. He left.
And you know that those are the things that, but sometimes things happen to people that are unusual, but they can like poo-poo it away on my imagination. It wasn't really there. But this is the kind of thing that you cannot talk yourself out of the reality of the moment. This
little girl was the kind of thing that it wasn't their imagination. It was just dealing with the after effects of it. It was, maybe devastation's too strong of a word, but I heard these stories. Now, this story came to me from someone in management.
Okay.
But the rest of the people who saw that little girl, I heard the story from them, and it was disturbing. Now, the next encounter, and this is the worst one that I heard. To me, this is the scariest one. Now, I did not hear it from the agent it happened to. I heard it from the person he told within 10 minutes of it happening.
Okay.
I was assigned to Morone Valley one day on a late day shift, me and a fellow agent named Sal. And we rode separately like we always did. And come around the end of the shift, it was starting to get dusk, and we started heading back to the station. Now, Morone Valley separated the Otay Mountains from the Tecate Mountains, and at that time, the El Cajon Border Patrol Station worked the Tecate Mountains, so we would run into those guys while they were heading to Tecate, and we were leaving Otay. And this day, I'm coming out, and I seen a Bronco coming down, and then he turned off east and headed toward Tecate Mountain. It was an El Cajon agent.
Okay.
I didn't speak to him. I continued driving out, and when I got up to the gate in question, I seen my partner Sal parked just north of that gate. And he had his window down, and he wanted me to come over and talk, which I thought was a little strange because we were taking it back to the station, and we could just talk at the station. But he wanted to tell me something right then. Went over there, and he said, "Did you see that El Cajon agent going south on Morone?" I said, "Yes, I did, but I didn't talk to him." He said, "Well, I ran into him up here at the gate, and I've got to tell you what he told me. He got out to open this gate, and there's a little creek, very, very small creek that ran parallel with the road." Okay. He said he looked over, and there was this little girl floating face down in the water.
Oh
And it looked like a baby or a child, about 2 or 3.
Uh-huh.
He was wearing white. He said he ran back to the truck, and he was leaning half in his truck and half out of his truck, and he grabbed the radio to call for help and report it. And he looked back over at the creek, and she wasn't there anymore. She was gone. And then he looked down next to his knee, and she was standing next to him.
Oh, my God.
Staring in the eye.
Okay, because he's thinking when he sees it, this is a real little kid that's in the creek that's drowned.
Drowned the creek, yes.
Oh, my. Okay, that would have scared like 20 years of life off of me.
Well, he just froze. He couldn't move. Said he was just frozen with fear for several seconds. And the little girl was just staring him right in the eye. And then she went away. And he said when he got up there, the guy was still shaking. He said he was shaking visibly.
And was she always dressed the same? Like, was there any comparison? Like, was it?
It was always the same. Always in white. Now, some guys thought it might have been a white dress. Most of them thought it was a white nightgown like little kids used to wear,
right.
Old days. Now, I started searching the internet for child deaths in that area. Now, Morone Valley doesn't really have anyone living in it.
Okay.
I mean, there's just a handful of people, and they're only allowed to live in the northern half. There's gates that keep them out of the southern half.
Okay.
Now, at some point back in 1837, there was a settlement in that area when the Spanish gave out these big land grants.
Okay.
And some viceroy or something had a very large land grant in this area, and there was a whole little city set up there, which was contained on his plantation or farm, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
There was a lot of people who lived there. Now, in 1837, there was an Indian massacre where the local Indian tribe came in and killed virtually everyone there.
Wow.
One of the stories I heard was that they went to the ranch foreman's house, and the mother was holding about a 2.5 to 3-year-old child in her arms, and she had 2 teenage daughters.
Okay. And
the daughters were begging the Indians not to kill the baby.
Okay.
And they killed the mother, and they were begging them. The daughters were begging them not to kill the baby. It doesn't say if the baby was killed or not.
Okay.
It says after that, the 2 teenage girls were dragged away into captivity and never saw again.
Okay.
The child's name was either Clara or Clarl.
Okay.
That's the only child death I could verify.
That's been recorded, in other words.
That's the only possibility for that apparition. Well, not the only possibility. It's just the only thing I could find.
Right. But that makes you think. And let me ask you, who are the tribes that are out there?
Well, the Kumeyaay is the dominant tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's other tribes, smaller tribes that go by different names, and I don't know if they are part of the Kumeyaay tribe or if they are completely different tribes.
Okay.
I'm not sure. And I don't know which tribe this was that did the massacre.
Wow. Because if this was 1837, this was even prior to it being, I imagine, part of the United States. This was just out there.
It was either Spanish or it was probably Mexico.
Mexican territory.
But it had only been Mexico for about 7 years, because I think up until 1830 it was part of Spain. Mm-hmm. So it was a very short time. These were basically all Spanish people. The foremans and the owner were all Spanish people. Mm-hmm. And some of their workers would have been the local Mexican people.
Right, but they found themselves in the predicament like all settlers when you go into areas like this, which basically you're on the edge of civilization, where they had encounters with the native tribes. And, when you were out there, let's face it, that scenario of the cavalry coming in and saving your butt,
not
9 times out of 10, that didn't happen.
There was no cavalry there.
Yeah.
The first cavalry post in the area was, maybe not the first, but one of them was a post over there very close to Campo, which probably would have protected that area. And I believe that was a Buffalo Soldier outpost, I believe.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
And
but it's
that,
not like today. Basically, people had to depend on themselves for their own defense.
right, they
And
were on their own. Nobody was going to come save them. There was no American army, and I
hmm
guess who knows where the Mexican army was stationed in that area.
so yeah, and relations between the native tribes and those people. It was, from what I understand, historically, sometimes it went well, but it could go sideways, and or you would have stuff like this would happen. Um, I mean, you hear of those stories. I know it was from Texas where they would take the girl, abductees and sell them into Mexico, and this was, of course, there was no borders or anything like that. So that's a horrible. And you know what? That's very possible. That who knows what happened to that child? That very well could have been that child that maybe they took her and then it was like, forget it. Who's gonna if you're a raiding party, you know. Maybe
Well,
all you're
what use?
interested in is the young teenagers because you could sell them,
Right. Well, and I mean, and it sounds horrible, but to a raiding party, what use would a child be to them?
exactly. You're not gonna. It's
It
like
was just another mouth to feed for no reason, So I
exactly.
mean, that sounds horrible, but that's how things happened back then.
Yeah, and that very possibly could be the. But let me tell you, and you know what? Because there's a lot of people that say, well, you have paranormal events or people see that, but it's residual and it's always the same place at the same time, and it's like there's no intelligence. It's just. But from what you're describing, this girl appears all over the place to different people in under different, appearances. That part where like the no face, and then you see her in the stream, and it was like, oh crap, So to me, that it's not a residual haunting, and
I,
it's disturbing, and I think to a lot of people, especially when you're seeing as a child. But then again, you're telling me that this whole area, even before that, has a reputation among the native tribes that there was something there on that land or part of that land before, people came there and, started either settling on it or now that it's being used, to
and that could
traffic.
have actually been what caused the attack
Yeah. Yes.
because they didn't want them. Maybe they didn't want them. Now they weren't up on the mountains; they were in Maroon Valley. But Maroon Valley is very, very small. Maroon Valley, there's parts in Maroon Valley that's 20 or 30 feet wide, and then there's other parts that's a half a mile wide. It could have
Okay.
been that maybe they attacked them because they didn't want them up there or in there
Yes.
met with those spirits. Of course, I don't know. That was 200 years ago, and uh, who knows?
Well, you know what? There's a lot of beliefs also, especially with Native Americans that understand a little bit better about elemental spirits. Like what they were saying, when they disturb them, they don't just go after the people that did the disturbing. You upset the whole
Right,
feeling.
the lid's
Everybody
off.
gets affected.
Yeah, the cat's out of the bag, and you can't get it back in.
Right. So maybe they were living there and they're like, you're up there and you're not supposed to be there and we're going to suffer the repercussions. And but let me tell you, what now, this little girl, obviously, it sounds like she had been appearing out there for years and years and years and just to different people in different ways. And it's one of those things like, who knows if that mystery's ever going to be solved, especially if what happened was way back when. Did you ever, how about, besides the time that the groups that you picked up were describing what could have been, because you said that there was, you referred to it at what was as the
Proctor Valley Monster.
Proctor Valley Monster. Was that name given to it from before, or how long had that been
Yes,
around?
that was local folklore that started back in the 50s and 60s, I believe.
Really?
And now I don't cover this in my book, but one of the local San Diego agents told me about it. Actually, two or three of them did.
Okay.
Now, Proctor Valley ran parallel with the Otay River, and it was probably less than a mile apart. But there was a ridge line that separated them, so you couldn't see Proctor Valley from Otay Lakes, but they were very close.
Okay.
What I found, checking some of the stories out about the Proctor Valley Monster, there's not a lot of them, but I guess there was a a wealthy doctor that lived in that area on Proctor Valley Road back in the 60s and 70s, and he was always calling the San Diego Sheriff's Department and reporting a Bigfoot on his property. Okay. And that's how he would report it. He would report that there was a monster on his property, that it was a Bigfoot. And, of course, the sheriffs at first thought it was quite funny. You know, we'll go out and talk to this kook. Like, how did this guy ever get to be a doctor?
Doctor, exactly. It's like, you taking some of your meds or what?
Still. He still had a practice, you know, so he had patients still.
Uh-huh.
Now, there wasn't a lot of different deputies in that area because, especially back then, this was still a remote area.
Okay.
So you're only talking about one or two deputies that were probably resident deputies out there. So to be the same one or two deputies,
I would always go back out
time on this report. Well, over time, both of these deputies became convinced that he was telling the truth, that there was some kind of a monster out there.
Yeah.
And obviously, they never caught it because no one ever has. But they, even the deputies became convinced over time that the doctor was telling the truth.
And what was he describing? Was it the typical Bigfoot description, or because when you say monster, I mean it like?
Yes, typical Bigfoot description. Yeah. Now, oddly enough, when we would get stories from illegal groups crossing,
okay.
You know, they would be talking to us in Spanish, so they always used the word monstruo for monster.
Mm-hmm.
They never called it Bigfoot that I recall or anything like that. It was always a monster.
Right. They
had lots of encounters. They were harassed many times by that type of creature, and several times they thought, well, maybe this is, you know, a Border Patrol agent just messing with us and having some fun. You know, maybe it's a Border Patrol agent in a monkey suit just
it's like what?
Chasing us around and having a good time.
Right. That's a better thought than that it's actually really something.
Yeah. But no, over time, during their encounters, they became quite convinced as well that, hey, this is not an agent just messing with us. This is serious. And there were instances I was told of where groups gave themselves up for safety. They looked for an agent, gave themselves up, and they wanted safety and protection from the agent because they knew he had a weapon. Now, there was one instance I was told of in which an agent and a group both saw a Sasquatch-type creature together.
What? Can you imagine? It's like, this is chasing us, and then it's like, oh, God.
And the agent was running just like they were.
Oh, yeah. It's like, hey, all I have to do is run faster than you.
I'll rearrest all you guys later, but right now we're all just running for our lives.
Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh. And that's got to be one of the most frightening things where everybody, it's like, you know, I hate to say it, but almost like every man for himself, because how do you deal with that reality that you're looking at something which it doesn't, according to you, to your reality, doesn't exist? And you're like, okay.
It's like, this can't be happening, you know.
Yes.
Well, the story went was it was shortly before dark, and the agent had went down the south side of Otay Mountain, and he had caught 4 or 5 people, and he was hiking them back up toward the top of the mountain, which was actually heading toward Windmill Canyon. But he was hiking them back toward the top of the mountain, and shortly before they got to the top, he heard a bunch of brush crashing down below them through this manzanita brush.
Okay.
Now, a person really couldn't get through that brush. So the fact that something is crashing through there is, you know, it's just not too easy to crash through manzanita brush.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he didn't see it right off the bat, but the prisoners did, and they were just walking behind him, and they said, "Oficial, mira eso." You know, they were all real excited. They ran up behind him and were trying to crowd in behind him. And what they said was, you know, "Officer, do you see that?" And they're all pointing at it. And he looked down there and he said there was this Bigfoot type of creature. And it was just beating the brush down ahead of it like he was swimming through it, like in a swimming motion. He was using his arms to just smash the brush and just trample through it. He said he thought the brush was about 6 or 8 feet tall in that area.
Okay.
The creature's head and shoulders were above it.
So that's 9,
So
10 feet at the very least.
10 feet or better.
Mm-hmm.
And he was not having trouble getting through that brush. He was just destroying it. He went through it. They all took off running, all of them.
Let me tell you, and it makes you think, here these group of people that have risked everything through all this treacherous thing to come into the country, whatever, they're here they're thinking, and they'd rather turn themselves in to Border Patrol than face what they saw out there. That to me speaks volumes.
Go out and take the risk with it anymore.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I was doing an interview months ago with the show up north, and a couple days later, I get this message. This guy's wanting to call me, and he said that him and his buddy. Now he was an American citizen, but his buddy had crossed illegally about 20 years ago.
Okay.
And he had crossed through Otay Mountain, and he said, "I think I was in one of those stories he was talking about, because when we crossed, we had this Bigfoot type creature following us, and it followed for over an hour. And at first, we thought it was an agent just messing with us, but he got close. And when it got close, we realized it was about 10 or 12 foot tall. And we took off running, and we just ran until we couldn't run anymore. And then when we stopped, he was gone. We didn't see it anywhere.
That's incredible.
And we got up to the top of the mountain, and we ran into another group that had crossed illegally, and there was about 30 in that group, and there was about 25 in his group. They had also seen that creature, and they were waiting on the road for Border Patrol to come by because they were giving up. Their journey was over. They were going to give up. He said his group decided to go ahead because he said we hadn't seen it in over an hour, so they decided to push on.
Uh-huh. And I can imagine, here are all these people, different, it's not like a mass hysteria. You have different groups, and then a month later you have another group, and, whatever. And they're all kind of describing the same thing or running from whatever. Let me ask them, do they normally travel more at nighttime, the groups, rather than the daytime in order so that they don't get caught? Is that what was happening?
It depends on the terrain and the ground cover on the terrain. But generally speaking, you're busier at night.
Okay.
Certain times of the year, you're much busier at night. One example of that would be there were certain times of the year where day shift would almost be as busy as night shift. Okay. But then other times of the year, you might catch 30 or 40 people on the day shift. But then that night on the shift,
right,
for an 8-hour shift, you might catch 600 or 700. So,
my God, that is incredible.
It could vary greatly.
And did you, and I guess since you were there for so many years, did you ever notice a pattern of when you had these sightings more at certain times of the year versus other times, or was this just whenever?
I never gave any thought to it, but I would say my first several experiences were springtime, but then the experiences that came later, I'm not sure when they were. I can't remember the time of year they were. Right. I know in the case of Agent Santiago's apparition reappearing, that lasted for about 7 months, and that started in the middle of the summer, and it ended in January. So that would have been through the fall.
Okay, so and the reason because I want to talk now about that apparition of the agent, and the reason why I asked that as far as the sightings of whatever it is, the Bigfoot sightings. Sometimes I think of it as, sometimes they seasonally go into some area, and then in the wintertime it's too cold, and then they move over, and then sightings go up because they're just going to where maybe the weather is better for them. But from what you're telling me, this could happen at any time. It wasn't really, because I'm always thinking, was there any mountains close by that during the winter just became like inhospitable or anything like that?
No, it only got cold at night.
Okay.
At night it might get down to pretty close to freezing in that area, but it
Okay.
stayed pretty consistent year round. Now, I came to the conclusion concerning the Bigfoot creature because every story went the same way. They saw the creature, except for my own story, of course. But
Okay.
they saw the creature. It could have easily overtaken them. It could have caught them easily.
Right.
It charged them. It ran at them. It was huge. They heard it, and then all of a sudden it's gone, and there's no trace whatsoever of it anymore. And it really got me thinking, in conjunction with my own experience, that really just can't be, because we had 500 agents assigned to Brownfield at that time, and we ran about 3 to 4 different night scopes all the time, every night. We covered every trail. We covered every inch of that mountain.
Okay.
And there was no Bigfoots living there all the time. And it really led me to believe that this creature is something that comes and goes as it pleases, and it is either able to completely cloak itself
Okay.
from ability, or it is some kind of interdimensional creature
You read my mind.
related to the spirits.
Yes, you read my mind, because you know what? A lot of that description that you had when they saw it on the scope with a heat signature, that's very telling, though, because this is you. If it's living, it's giving off a heat signature. So
It's real. Well, it's
yeah,
real.
it's like, okay, this was not like whatever. It's not like a mirage,
Not
in
like
other
a
words.
ghost. Right. Because a ghost doesn't really, I guess a ghost could give a cold spot or something, but it's not going to show up like that.
But you guys were looking for living, things. That's why you were looking for a heat signature, I imagine, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that right there, that puts it into the realm. But then, and I've heard of theories, especially when it's sightings of either Bigfoot or weird animals or creatures, that like there's an interdimensional rip sometimes in certain places, okay, where people claim they've seen things that are just like of creatures that like, what is that? Okay, and by no means, I know there's some stuff out there that's strictly urban myth, like, okay, somebody, just made something up and people ran with it. But then you have other stories, even historically, of groups of people seeing things like this that you really can't account for. Like you said, nobody finds it, or they can't find any type of tracks, or they never find anything. And, one of the theories is that these creatures, there's an interdimensional rip in that area, and they come and they go, but they're not there all the time, and that's why when people go and actually hunt for them, there's just nothing ever found.
Yeah. You're not going. I firmly believe, and I'm not trying to discourage people from looking for Bigfoot. I would like to go hunt him myself, because it's a lot of fun walking around in the woods at night. To be honest with you, it's exhilarating. It's a lot of fun. So I'm not opposed to going to look for him myself. But I don't think you can go have a Bigfoot experience on purpose.
Yes.
I think it's just going to happen. Now, if you can find where one of these rips are, or a portal, you definitely increase your chances, for sure. You increase your chances. And you might get lucky, because people do have these encounters. They are seen, and they're seen a lot. There's a lot of these. Just don't expect to catch one. Don't expect to be the guy that's going to come up with proof, because I really believe you're not. And as I checked into this more and more, and with me being law enforcement, I was really mostly interested in, are there other law enforcement or military having Bigfoot encounters? Like park rangers or reserve deputies out in remote areas, special forces that are camped out. Because we used to have we used to have some people that would come camp out on the mountain for us for a couple of weeks at a time.
Okay.
To gather intel. And so I started looking to see how many encounters can I find involving the military or special forces or other border patrol or some other kind of law enforcement, maybe even in another country. And what do they think of a Bigfoot encounter? What I found is that while the mainstream media is overwhelmingly, and all the TV shows that you see, they are overwhelmingly convinced that if it exists, it's a primate, just a lost primate. But what I run into with a lot of these law enforcement and military type encounters, if you can find anything out or they'll talk to you, is that it takes on a paranormal dimension to it.
Yes.
And it's scary. It's something they don't want to mess with. And somebody, one of the guys told me, and one of the investigators that actually believes that it could be paranormal or interdimensional, told me probably the reason that law enforcement and the military, that their encounters are sometimes scarier or more terrifying, is because the creature feels more threatened by you because you act way different. You're in hunting mode. You're hunting something, and it's more threatened by you, so it is sending out a stronger warning to you. It is trying to warn you, I guess telepathically, in a more forceful manner, stay back and keep your distance.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, in other words, you're not knocking a piece of wood, like the stick on the tree, and you're like, okay, that's not what you're doing.
Yeah, that's not scaring us off. That's attracting us. That's not scaring us off.
As a matter of fact, I spoke to Mr. Jim Smith. He's the founder of Alabama Bigfoot Society, and he's been working with that since like 1971. And we were talking about it, and he's telling me about this lady that he knows about her, and she lives by herself, kind of like in a remote farm area. And according to him, she stands out there in the backyard of her house, which I guess, fades off into the woods. She's out there doing these calls that you see people do, these Bigfoot calls. And he's been telling her, don't do that. You really don't know when you're calling whatever it is.
You don't know what you're messing with.
Are you basically putting out a war cry? Are you putting out a mating call? You don't know. And he keeps telling her, you don't do that. Especially you're out there by yourself, on a farm on the edge of the woods. And according to her, obviously she's heard it or seen something, but he told me he's been doing this for many years. He goes, I warn people, when they supposedly are trying to make this friendly communication with Sasquatch, is like, you're thinking, because people, I guess, want to deal with it on a human basis, like you said, because they're looking at it as maybe primate or kind of human or quasi-human. They're assuming a lot.
They're assuming a lot. They're assuming that he's a dumb animal, and they're going to domesticate him and make a pet out of him.
Yeah.
Somehow. And I'll tell you what, whatever we dealt with in the creek that night was not a dumb animal. It was something that was mentally superior to us, in that it could make us feel what it wanted us to feel.
He was stalking you guys.
Yeah.
And you know what? And I know that most human beings do not like that feeling, because we always think of ourselves at the top of the food chain or the predator chain because of our weapons. And you know what? I've heard a lot of theories, and I agree with you on a lot of the thing of the Bigfoot. That, again, I mean, I'm not the kind of person that thinks kill everything or decimate it. Absolutely not. But I absolutely do believe in you need to approach with caution. And again, what is the origin of Bigfoot or whatever the creature is? Because now there's different versions of it, and it might not be, like you said, the lost, the one primate that went off on its own, and
Right. Now I have heard, and I've heard, I've had this discussion with some people in the military.
Okay.
I mean, no one's super secret. It's just people who happen to be at the right place at the right time and seen something. Okay. And they got interested and did some of their own research. And I've heard, I talked to someone from Alaska not long ago concerning some of this Bigfoot stuff. And in Alaska and Siberia, they have areas of forest where these things have evidently, they go through and they just break the tops of trees off, some of the smaller trees.
Wow.
And they stick them, they jab them down in the ground upside down. And that's your warning to stay out.
Yes, I've see that.
From other researchers down in Texas and on some of these large ranches that have very, very large ranches, and they have money, so they can afford these night vision scopes like we're talking about, where most people can't. Mm-hmm. observed these Bigfoot creatures, said they do hunt and kill while they're here. And we've seen them pick up a 300-pound hog and throw it through the air against a tree to kill it and then eat it on the spot. So these things, they do kill while they're here. And
right.
They do eat.
Yeah. Everybody thinks that they're what? That they're munching on leaves? No.
They are carnivorous, and they don't sit around eating grapes and leaves.
Uh-huh.
So people really need to think, really, if somebody thinks they're at the top of the food chain, they need to go out into some very remote, dense forest completely alone, even if they take a pistol for protection, which I would recommend.
Mm-hmm.
But find some very dark, deep woods and just go out there and spend the night out there by yourself and see if you still feel like you're at the top of the food chain a few hours later.
Let me tell you something. I mean, I've gone camping a few times. And by the way, it's safe camping, but I know and even then you start hearing noises that are just, sometimes it's raccoons and regular stuff, but when you're out there and you start hearing, it's not quiet. Everybody thinks that even though you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's quiet. It's not. There's a lot of noises and animal noises and things, and it's like, it's scary.
And you're in all the woods I had been in my life previously to the Border Patrol, it was like that. There was noise all the time. But now in the case of Otay and Otay Mountain, I've never been anywhere that was so quiet in my life. There was complete silence all the time.
Isn't that weird? Wasn't that weird?
It was. It added to the weirdness of the place. There was very little. The only thing I ever seen up there, other than people, other than agents, and illegal groups, was you had a few mountain lions that roamed the area.
Okay.
You had rattlesnakes, and you had a handful of rabbits. But there was nothing up there that made noise. It was just stone silence all the time.
And that in and of itself is really strange because, like I said, in my experience, I mean, I live on a piece of land, and I'm on the edge of the Everglades. And at night, it's not quiet. It's not, there's just a million noises.
There's always something tromping through the woods at night. There's always a deer or raccoon or something, possum or something. But yeah, that wasn't the case on Otay Mountain.
And I'm gonna follow up on that because I have a good friend of mine. She's Native American. She's Choctaw, but her family went and they settled out in California. And she's she's worked with a lot of the different tribes and things like that. I want to ask her. I would go. She could tell me, like, what's the history, what was supposedly out there, because she might be able to give me an answer, because I really, truly do think that, I agree with what you said, that what's out there predates any of this more modern stuff, and it just so happened that you were all there now to witness it, but it's, that thing has been there, whatever it is, long before even modern times.
And now, being from Oklahoma myself, I have lots of friends that are half tribal members, and some of them are tribal members. So I've been around a lot of things like that, and I'm familiar with a lot of the eastern tribes and the Oklahoma tribes. Now, the tribes out west they have a completely different culture for the most part. It seems like. You don't hear these stories from the eastern tribes like the Choctaw and the Chickasaw and Cherokee that you hear from the Hopi and the Kumeyaay and the Tohono O'odhams and things like that. All of these western tribes, they're talking about these spirit beings and these alien type beings that they've had these relationships with.
Yes.
Hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yes.
And you don't hear that so much, if at all, from the eastern tribes.
Right, the western tribes have that mystical more aspect as far as explaining certain things like that.
And even physically, they're very different physical type tribes, appearance to a large point. It's quite strange sometimes.
Well, no, and the reason why I was saying that is, like I said, sometimes people look at, the Native American mythology and they think of it strictly as mythology, when they try to explain things like that. Or when they say, certain places don't go there. But a lot of times, when you like suspend your disbelief, you realize there was a reason. You know, maybe when they would have a group of people, of Native Americans that were living in that spot, would say, don't go to that mountain, or don't go to that canyon, or don't do that because, and it's like, yeah, you know, whatever's there predates modern times.
People write it off because, well, I went to that canyon and I didn't see anything. Well, maybe these beings and these spirits have a relationship with one group of people, and they don't have it with another group of people. So you're not going to see something. It doesn't mean they're not there because you don't see it.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that the Native Americans were more open to. There's some things that you sense that are not really friendly, for lack of a better words, towards humans, and they didn't say, "Oh well, I need to explore to find out more about it." They were like, "Leave it alone."
Well, and that's the other thing. You know, when you get information from some of these tribes, just because they know of these spirits and have some kind of relationship with them, doesn't mean they're friendly.
Nah.
And they're not telling you that they're all friendly either. They're telling you some of them are bad.
Yeah.
Stay away.
Yeah, as far as they're concerned, it's like we kind of ignore each other, and I'm going to pretend that I'm not going to acknowledge you, because I think that if you became aware that I'm aware that you're there, it's like, you know, I'm just going to leave you alone and you do your thing, because I know that you don't hate me, but you don't love me.
Yeah.
You know?
I know that if I stay in my yard, you won't come over and bother me.
Exactly. And some people forget all about that. And then you go to people, oh, let's find out. Let's find it. You know, let's capture it. Let's videotape it. And it's like that. Yeah.
Well, you know, of course, I know people, I know lots of agents who spent years up on that mountain and never had one single thing happen. Then I know lots of people who did, and sometimes you're surprised of the people who did. So, you know, it just doesn't present itself to everyone, but there is no doubt in my mind that these spirits exist. They're there. It's real. Every religion on earth has some account of some kind of spirit that lives that we don't see with our eyes.
Yes.
And it messes with us in one way or the other.
Yes.
The Bible has it throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. Islam has it. I can't think of any religion right off the top of my head that does not have some kind of account of some kind of spiritual being or race that is next to us on this planet, whether we see it or not.
Right.
Well, these things are real. I don't really encourage people trying to contact them, because you don't know who you're contacting or who's going to answer back. And once you open that door, I was filming a TV show recently, and the crew that was filming the show had worked on The Conjuring, and they've done this their whole life. And he told me, we were socializing after the shoot was over. I ran into him later that night, and they said, I had an incident with the night of Agent Santiago's death with my radio, and I didn't answer it because I was afraid. And he said, yeah, you don't answer it. Said, because all it takes is just 1 millisecond. You open that door for 1 millisecond, and now it's in your house, and you can't get rid of it.
Right. Good luck putting the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah. He said, you did the right thing not answering that radio call.
And you know what? As a matter of fact, I just finished interviewing this lady, and, you know, one of the things that we were talking about was similar to what you're describing, which is called Territorial Warfare. And she was describing how she had gone over to Venezuela, and she says that there's an area that borders between Venezuela and Colombia. And she was explaining to me briefly that, you know, there's a lot of trafficking, human trafficking, drugs, murder, mayhem, you name it, on this area of land. And she's worked with different teams that go in there, and basically they pray and they anoint the area, because she says that it becomes so bad, the psychic, that nobody can live there. If anybody does live, she goes, when you went out there, it was horrible. It was like dirty, and you would see all these scavenging at dogs, and it was just like, it looked like horrible. And she says nobody can live there. Anybody that lives in the perimeter, they just suffer ill effects. And I mean, that's understandable, because they know what happens there, you know, or what's, you know, a lot of bloodshed. And she was telling me that over there, there was constantly people getting murdered. And, she was there only for like, I think a week, and then she left, but she stayed in touch with some of the people that lived there. And they said that after they did that, there was a bunch of people that came back. There had been a decrease in the murders of bloodshed, some of those things you can't eradicate it. But I absolutely believe that, when certain things happen on a piece of land, it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Yeah, you might say, okay, all these bad things happened there and it's kind of like cursed the land. Or was there something already there in that area that is what promotes for people to do and act certain ways? And when you said that thing about, also, I'm going to go away from that. When you said that you got that call on the radio from this agent that was dead or had lost his life, and that you said,
when he got
no.
killed.
I've heard of that a lot. I've heard of that. I've heard of people like getting like 3 knocks on their door, things like that. It's almost like they're announcing, and like you said, that if you open the door or you basically allow it entrance, even if it's unwitting, that's it. It's like then that's when people start having experiences inside their house and things like that. And tell me about Agent Santiago, because it sounds like this was the one that you said that fell off of one of the cliffs, right?
Right.
And what happened? What was it? He was on patrol at night and he lost his footing, or what happened with him?
We were still on the training unit, and it was about 3 days before the end of our training cycle.
Okay.
And at the end of those 3 days, we were going to take a test. And if we passed that test, then we would be real agents. We wouldn't be trainees anymore.
Okay.
So we were out. This was our last few nights in the field. One way or the other. Because if you fail your test, you're fired. You lose your job.
Yeah.
Pass it, you're a real agent.
Pass or fail situation.
Right. And we had been working a place called Dam Canyon, and it's so named because the canyon starts at the back of Otay Lake, where the dam is.
Okay.
And the dam is probably a couple hundred feet tall, and is surrounded by mountains. And the peak of one side of the mountain is about 1,800 feet, and the other peak's only about 800 feet.
Okay.
But there's cliffs intermingled along where the dam is. There's a set of cliffs that are about 120 feet, and then a little ways over, there's another set of cliffs that are about 300 to 400 feet. And we had been working this area at night. Very difficult area to work, and it was very, very busy, and was working midnight shift.
Okay.
I had never been scheduled to work with Agent Santiago before, but on this particular night was going to be my first time to be scheduled to work with him. But I had gotten overheated from the previous night working, and I called in sick that night. So I didn't go to work that night.
Okay.
So he teamed up with another training officer and 3 or 4 other trainees, and they were all going to work together. And they went out to Otay Lakes, and they went out to the dam. They were going to drop down into Dam Canyon along a real narrow trail that ran in between the dam of the lake and that set of cliffs that was about 120 feet tall.
Okay.
And they were going to climb down those, and they were in the process of going down there, and they run into a group. Now, they thought that all the group was below them in the canyon. But for whatever reason, Agent Santiago ran back up the trail and over toward the top of the cliff. So
okay.
We theorized that he may have seen somebody over there, like the smuggler, for instance.
Okay.
Well, the other agents didn't see, and he went up there to try to get them. That's one theory.
Okay.
Nevertheless, he ran up to the top of that cliff for some reason. And when he got up there, the other agents heard him scream and seen his flashlight tumbling down the cliff.
Oh.
They knew he went over. They got down to the bottom as quick as they could, and they ran to where they saw the flashlight land, and there was Agent Santiago. He had fallen off the cliff and was killed instantly when he landed.
So there was nobody there. He got separated because he ran up in the other
He,
direction and everybody was
he
further
ran
down.
off. He broke away on his own and ran off the other direction. Now, they could never prove that anyone was up there at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was listed as an accident.
Okay.
The time of death, I believe the official time of death was listed, I think, at 12:02, and the newspaper reported his time of death as being 1 or 2 minutes after midnight.
Okay.
I was home asleep when this happened. I went to bed about 10 because like I said, I was sick. I was woke up by a beeping inside my bedroom. It was a arithmetic type of beeping. It woke me up. I started looking around for it, couldn't find it, and I determined it was coming from my closet. I opened the closet up, and I realized that it was my walkie-talkie from work was doing that.
Okay.
So I thought I must have left it on, and somehow there's some kind of emergency going on, and there's an emergency signal or something, I guess.
Okay.
I checked the radio, and the radio was actually off. It wasn't on, but it was beeping. I thought, well, wow, that's weird. It must have a short in it.
Okay.
So I turned it on and turned it back off a couple times, and it stopped. I looked over at the clock, and the clock said 12:02. It didn't mean anything to me at the time, so I went back to bed.
Okay.
Got up the next morning, and I got a phone call, and I found out about Agent Santiago being killed. And he said the time of death was just a couple of minutes after midnight.
Wow.
Right then, I kind of put two and two together, and I thought that is either, one heck of a coincidence, or
yes, exactly, exactly. Didn't
So,
you feel like your guardian angels later on were looking out for you that night? I mean, like they say, when you dodge a bullet, you really don't know you dodged it, but sometimes it's like.
And I thought many, many times, how would things change had I went to work?
Mm-hmm.
Either wouldn't have got killed, or both of us would have got killed, or it would have still happened the same way.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that I thought about that a lot. I thought, well, I know in my mind I knew who was on the radio. That radio had never done that before. I had carried that radio for 5 or 6 months already.
Okay.
And never experienced anything like that. So the next couple of nights went by, and it didn't do it again. There was no more beeps on it. It functioned normally. So the night of his funeral, we went to his funeral that day. I came home that night, and I went to bed about 10 o'clock again. And once again, I was woken up out of sleep with that same arithmetic beeping. And this time I knew exactly what was happening.
Okay.
Right over to the closet, and there it was. There was that radio going off, beeping again. And I looked over at the clock, and it said 12:02.
Oh.
And I knew in my heart that there was something on that radio that was going to tell me that they were Agent Santiago. Now, I wasn't convinced it was going to be Agent Santiago. I thought it could be a spirit or something.
Right. And you were like...
I was just shivering. There were chills going up and down my spine, and I was afraid to answer it, and I didn't answer it.
I don't blame you.
I turned it off 2 or 3 more times, on and off, and it didn't quit. And I finally took the battery off, and that's when it finally stopped, is when I disconnected the battery, physically disconnected the battery from the radio. And then it never did it again. That was the only 2 nights that radio ever did that. The night of his death and the night of his funeral. And I carried that radio for 5 years after that.
Exactly. And that's the thing that, as much as you want to explain it or like rationalize it, it is what it is. What's the timing, the significance of the dates? It's like you can't rationalize it. And what it is it sounds to me like it was communication from the other side. Who was at the other end? That's the big question mark.
Who, that's it. Who's at the other end? And this is what I was talking with one of the film crew members, and he said, "Yeah, you did the right thing not answering that." Said, because I've talked to countless people who've answered that call, and the nanosecond they answer that call, it's too late. They've done let it in. They can't get it back out, whatever it happens to be. and you don't know what it is.
Oh yeah. And you know what? Because you were telling me that it was these people that were working on that film, The Conjuring, right?
Yes.
And you know what? And people think, well, whether you believe that actual story or not, because everybody accuses, the Hollywood dramatizes things or they make stuff up, whatever. Okay, but they don't understand that it might have nothing whatsoever to do with that story per se. It's basically what is being summoned with what's going on there. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Which might have nothing to do with the actual original story or anything like that. And, you hear that quite often sometimes from people that work on the production of certain horror films and even slasher films and things like that. That, some of it's like, it's like urban myth, but others will tell you stuff happens while this thing is being filmed and afterwards, that's very disquieting. And sometimes even happens not to the stars, but to the people that work behind the scenes in the production.
I have, I used to be interested in antique weapons and swords and knives and armor, things like that. I've always liked history and especially wartime history. But I don't collect that stuff anymore. I don't bring it to my house because if it's real,
yes,
you don't know what's attached to it. And I have talked to too many guys because in the Border Patrol, there's a lot of ex-military people there, and they've been all over the world. And they're students of history like I am. And many of these guys have brought things back into their homes that were authentic war relics. A sword, a knife, a helmet. Somebody was killed wearing that helmet. So that knife took a life, or that sword took lives.
Yes.
And they brought those things back in their home, and they started having things happen. And more than one guy has told me, said, I got that stuff out of my house, and I don't bring anything back.
Yeah. When they start going back, like, when did this all start? And then they realize it's when I brought this certain item into my house. And people don't, depending, like you said, especially if it's a weapon, there's a lot of emotion, fear, bloodshed, that could be attached to it. And sometimes it's not even that. It's just, if it belonged to a certain person for a length of time, they develop an ownership over it. That this is my thing. And I agree. It goes, that's when they bring stuff to their homes. And I remember one time, this was many years ago, I remember I was going to one of these antique places. It was one of these, this was, before people were selling antiques on the internet, antique shops. It was a huge antique, and there was this beautiful portrait of this lady. It was like an older painting, but it was really, really nice. And I had looked at it, and I was thinking of getting it. And the lady, she was an older lady, she was the owner of the shop. We're talking back and forth, and I remember her store was it was like two stores that they had put together, had knocked down a wall. And one time I was there late, and she had turned off the lights on the other side of the store, which is where that painting hung. And I was by the cash register, and we were just talking, and all of a sudden I hear this noise, pa! And she's like, we look at each other like, what was that? So we walk in there, sure enough, this portrait, which had been firmly on the wall for, I don't know how long she had it, because I hadn't taken it off. I had just been looking because it was up on the wall, had fallen down. And I just got this feeling, and I never went back and I got it, because it was the feeling I got was that there was something going on with that portrait. And I know people could say, you were being superstitious. And in truth, I'm kind of a very analytical person. But the vibration, the thing I got that moment when I was over there and in the dark, this thing came off the wall. It was like, don't take that home. It was like, no, you're not taking that home. And that was just a portrait. That wasn't even a weapon. So I understand. And let me ask you, because you said, had you ever had your own personal experience with some type of item that you had gotten or a weapon that you brought home and things started happening?
I can't remember one. Actually, I have not had any experiences in my house.
Okay.
That I know of, that I've attributed that. Maybe I have, and maybe it was so minor I just wrote it off, thought it was just the wind blowing, or a bird hopping around the roof or something. But I don't bring antiques into my house either, really. I do have a couple of battle helmets, medieval battle helmets, but I'm quite sure they're not original. I'm quite sure.
Right, yeah. There's a lot of reproductions and stuff like that. That's different. But when you're talking an original piece that belonged to somebody and somebody ends up getting it, I personally, I tell people, sometimes they're really nice because, I know that some people even look at them as some type of investment, when they purchase some of these items. But it's like, okay, maybe you want to keep it like in a detached garage or somewhere else.
Well, it's just like I was watching the History Channel a couple of years ago when they had found one of Hitler's guns, and it had some blood stain on it. They said this might be the gun Hitler killed himself with, and it's worth $1 million, and all these people wanted it. And I'm thinking, do you really want something that evil in your house?
I wouldn't.
Can you imagine the possibility of the evil that might be attached to that gun?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't
want that.
Absolutely not. It'd be like, yeah, okay, good luck with that. No. When it comes to things like that, and that's the thing. So many people, once they're in the thick of it and they've got problems going on in their house and things occurring to them, it's like, oh my God, I think back to that turning off point where if I hadn't done this or I hadn't said that or I hadn't taken this thing or I hadn't purchased it, better safe than sorry, when it comes to something that can affect especially me and my home or my family life. And I'm very careful with that. And by this, I don't mean I'm walking around thinking, okay, everything is, paranormal or ghostly, or on the contrary. But I do have respect for that dividing line between that and, this life. And I know, because I've spoken to people, like you've said, that wouldn't lie, and they've described things to me where things have happened to them in their personal lives, experiences, and trying to rectify it, trying to straighten it out it's monumental, because once that enters your life, getting it out is difficult, and it's better not to mess with it to begin with. Rocky, I have had such a great time talking to you. You have no idea. If it was up to me, and I know that you've got your child there, I could talk. I bet you've got so many stories, whether it's paranormal or just the daily of. It sounds like what you were seeing out there on a daily basis was incredible. The stories and the experiences you had, It
was a good experience. The paranormal and the non-paranormal.
Right.
Overall, it was a good experience. The name of the book is Out on Foot.
Okay.
There is much more to the ghost stories than what we've discussed, especially Agent Santiago. Mm-hmm. So people can read that for themselves. And I always recommend people read it late at night.
On a dark and stormy night?
Read a scary story in the middle of the daytime, 2:00 in the afternoon. No. You wait till 10 or 11, 12 o'clock at night when the house is quiet, and then read something like that. But that's when I wrote it. My baby had just been born. I had just retired. The baby was 4 months old.
Okay.
And once everybody settled down and in the house, I set up at 12 and 1 and 2 and 3 o'clock at night by myself, typed it out on a laptop. So I think they should read it under those same circumstances, and I think they'll get more out of it.
Absolutely. And do you have your own personal website address?
I do. Yes, it's rockyelmore.com.
Okay. All right, that's simple. But I'm going to put in the credit of the show anyway, so that people can have a link to it. And are you planning on writing any other books?
Book writing is hard.
Yes, it is. It is. It is hard.
And unfortunately, people just don't buy books the way they used to in print. They get things electronically.
Yes.
I was really kind of thinking about writing another book, and I may still do it. If I do, it will be paranormal stories. There will be more paranormal and probably less stories about the Border Patrol.
Okay.
And it'll be paranormal things. But I'm looking for paranormal things that have happened to either law enforcement or the military while they were on duty, and write about those. I would like to keep it in that context if I could.
Sure.
Because I just think there's something extra good about things that happen to officers and soldiers while they're on duty.
Yeah, because they're not out there looking for the paranormal experience. It usually happens to them while they're in the course of their duties. And that's to me personally, that's one of the some of the most valid stories that you hear about is when people find themselves in those situations.
Because it's really a clash of, it's like a clash of cultures. The one culture does not mix with the other, and yet they're being forced together. Law enforcement and military does not mix with paranormal.
No.
And yet, when they come bumping heads together, and they're forced to deal with each other, it's quite interesting.
Yeah. And it's usually because there's something that's staring you in the face that you can't ignore it. Because I'm sure people sometimes have experiences and they're like, forget it. So usually when there's something there, there's like, okay, what do I do with this? That they can't walk away from it. They can't ignore it. But what we were talking about, sometimes what you do for your to make a living, and this is like, some of them talk about it sometimes years after they had the experience because, they say, if I talk about this now, they're going to, refer me to the counselor or something for whatever.
Well, and then you remember, too, that when this experience is over, you might have to make an official report on it. And how are you going to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
How are you going to say, I started down this trail because I heard gunshots, and I didn't find any gunshot victims, but I ran head on into a faceless ghost,
And
how are you going to put that in a report?
And it's like, and you're thinking, you know what? And at the end of the day, I might be looked at like I've lost a few screws and nuts, and I can't afford that because this is where I come to work, and part of my effectiveness is being mentally competent. So a lot of them think, let me just shut up.
Right, exactly. I mean, it could cost you your career, theoretically. It could. It'll certainly cost you promotions.
Oh, yeah, it will.
But thanks for having me on. I did enjoy this.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be following up with you. To be honest with you, just the setting of where you had these stories, because, we have this prototypical paranormal settings, like dark and stormy night in the dark house this setting of where you worked at that was so inherently dangerous just because of what was there, the terrain. That's scary. To me, that was scary. And then you put on there that layer of when you guys would have these encounters. And to me, that's like, this is the first. Honestly, this is the first. I loved your descriptions. I'll be following up with you. I do hope that you write that book. And I'll let you know when I release the show. Because honestly, like I said, I've talked to a lot of people in the paranormal field of different experiences, and I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by your stories. And again, thank you so much for coming and sharing your time with me.
Well, thank you. And one thing that's come to my attention over time too is that, and I really like this and encourage people to do it. People are actually Googling Otay Mountain and Takati Mountain to look for it for themselves because they find out, hey, I really can find these places and see what this looks like. Of course, they can't see what it looked like at night, when it happened, but they can get an ideal. Now, this was 20 years ago, most of these stories, so the city has creeped out toward that area, but Otay Mountain, Takati Mountain are still uninhabited. There's still nothing on those mountains. But, it's creeped up to the foothills of them. But, yeah, I encourage people to Google this stuff, find these places for themselves. And they've reported that they've really enjoyed finding these places for these things.
I had never heard of, of those experiences of that Proctor Valley, nothing, that Windmill Canyon, nothing. I never heard of any of this before. Okay, which is why I think it's fresh, it's fascinating. And like I said, when you and all the other agents were out there, you were just doing your job. You weren't like, ghost hunting group looking for EVPs. You guys were making a living, and these things, it's like, how can you ignore them? Which I think to me is like, lends this total validity to everything that you're talking about, especially people that normally they were like very clear cut. Let's like, the the truth, no imagination, because this is the type of work you guys were doing. So, I mean, to me,
I will tell you one more real quick little story that I just found.
Yes, of course.
It's not in the book,
Okay.
but it lends to the whole area.
Okay.
In 1980, Charles Bronson made a movie called Borderline, I believe it was.
Okay, yes,
now,
I do. Mm-hmm.
Now, this movie was original in that, with the exception of Charles Bronson and the co-star, all the Border Patrol agents in the movie are real agents, and they're at it was the Brownfield Stations area where I worked.
Okay.
It actually, at the time, I think it was the Chula Vista Station, but the movie was shot at Brownfield where I worked in Otay Valley, Otay Mountain, Mason, and such in there.
Okay.
And Ed Harris is also in the movie.
Okay.
Now, most of the aliens that are in the movie are also real aliens.
Wow.
Except for star smugglers. So it's one of the more realistic movies.
Okay.
During the film of that movie, there's a scene with Ed Harris and one of the other guys, and they're out in I can't tell exactly where they're at, but it's Otay Mesa or Otay Valley.
Okay.
They're shooting a night scene, and a UFO shows up in the scene, and
Really?
you can find it on YouTube. You can Google it and find it.
That's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to look this movie up.
Now, I don't know for sure it's a UFO, but they claim it's a UFO.
Okay.
I don't know if it was ever debunked or not, but something does show up in the scene and move around like an orb, and then it's gone. And I have seen something similar to that myself.
You opened that door, so I'm going to step right through to it, because I was going to ask you, but I said, if I keep asking him about
That's
this,
a
I'm
good
going to
place
say,
to stop.
Marlene, I got a family. UFOs. Did you see any? Did you hear people see? I mean, out there, this is like...
Not at Brownfield, no, I didn't. I never. That's the one thing I never really heard about was UFOs. Now, I know those stories exist because I have heard of some of them since.
Okay.
But in my 20 years, I never really heard of it. I just heard one little story, which I don't go into, and I can't really.
Okay.
But no, and that was very surprising,
Mm-hmm.
the total lack of UFO stories, which I think gives more credibility to the other stories.
Yeah.
Because if guys were lying about these stories, why not lie about a UFO story? And
Yeah, it's like, let's put some UFOs in the mix.
Of course. That's probably the most lied about paranormal event on the face of the earth is UFO stories.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, sometimes it could, to be honest with you, people see stuff and it's like, more than likely it is not a UFO in the sense of a UFO. It's something, but it's explainable, in other words.
But they can take a look at that movie trailer. I think the scene's about 30 seconds long, and
look at it.
And it's just interesting, if nothing else.
Yeah,
whether
I
it's
think
false
so.
Or not, I don't know, but I thought it was interesting that even when they shot a movie there, something paranormal happened.
Yes. And I think that's what I want to do. I'm going to look up that movie. I'm going to see the whole thing. Because you know what? This movie was probably shot, and I'm going to say this, before stuff was so politically correct. You know what I'm saying? So that's why you were saying that all these people in the background that they were killing, this was the real people, whether it was the agents or the illegal aliens that were there, with the exception of the stars. So it gives it, I know they were looking for the gritty, realistic, angle on it.
I will say this about that movie. I've watched it several times. It's a pretty good movie.
Mm-hmm.
It is way watered down.
Right.
Things were much worse there at that time than even what they allude to.
Okay.
But it does give you a good idea of what it was like to be out there at night, because they do shoot some night scenes, like with some night cameras or something. So you do get a little bit of a sense of how spooky that place can be and what it's really like on the border after dark. It's just, like I said, it's way watered down, but it does give you a little taste of it. I recommend people watch it if they got the time. It's a pretty good movie, and give them. And it was filmed in the area where the book was written.
So they need to look at the movie, then pick up your book and read it in that sequence, in that order.
Right. Yeah, that would be a good thing, because they would have visual. They could visualize things as they read the book then. Sure.
Let me tell you something. I mean, I know that it's almost, because that area is not really per se desert, right? But was it close to the desert?
Well, that's the deal. That area, Otay Mountain and Takati Mountain, are very, very green.
Really?
It's not desert at all.
Okay.
It's still an arid climate, but it's very green. So
Okay.
yes, it does not look like the desert. It doesn't look like what you'd expect to find in San
Right, because I'm
Diego.
always thinking of that Southwest scenario that you always get in your head that it's either desert or scrubby
No,
or dry.
these mountains could easily pass for mountains in the Ozarks or Virginia
Really?
or something like that. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. I'm going to definitely see that movie. Okay, Rocky, again, I want to thank you for sharing all these fantastic stories. And I'm hoping that you're going to produce another book so I can bring you back on and get more stories because I know you
Well,
must have a wealth of
I
stories.
am I am looking to take this to the next level. I
Mm-hmm.
won't say what yet because I don't know if
Okay.
it'll work out. But keep your eyes out. You might hear something else from me on a different kind of media. So,
Absolutely. You got it.
right.
Take care.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
again
much.
so much and have a great weekend.
You too. Have a good weekend. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
So, guys, what do you think? I don't know about you, but when he was giving those descriptions of what's going on out there, to me it was like, I mean, I have a good imagination, but you really don't need that much of a good imagination to think, what would I do if I'm out there at night doing my job? Most of the time it's in the dark and you're only, lucky if maybe you got some moon to light your way. And basically you have to be worried about, running across a group of illegal immigrants and the people that are escorting them, which those, that's criminal activity. They don't want to get caught. And then you run across these things. It's like, oh, what? And again, things like that, when you hear these stories, it's like, it makes you realize, and I've said this before, the paranormal, there's so many interesting things to it that they're not the sensational stuff, but especially when you talk to somebody like Rocky Elmore, who was working in this area for years and years and years. So they were there at all times. And, because that's basically especially when you work in an area that you see the truth of it, there's a lot to the paranormal that's not the sensational stuff, but to me personally, it's just as scary. Not only those encounters that they had out there with whatever that was, okay? That Bigfoot creature monster, sounds like the Predator thing. God, that was scary. That, the danger of stepping off a cliff and dying or getting killed. And how about these poor people that are running towards the border agents, like, save me because there's something out there that's chasing us. That part where the agent himself was running, that's like, okay, it's like every man for himself, because I think that human beings have this instinct still inside of us when we sense we better run. I gotta run, or if not, that's it, I'm done. And I mean, these descriptions to me were like riveting. I urge everybody to pick up his book, and read it. Because I know, as a matter of fact, in his book he details a little bit more about what occurred with that agent that met his death when he fell off the cliff, or was he pushed? They really don't know, because unfortunately, when he was out there, none of his fellow co-workers were there to witness anything. And he describes a lot of other things that happened with that, which are very, very interesting and very. It's like if you don't believe in the paranormal, you do. And again, these are people that weren't looking to have the paranormal experience. These people were not looking for the ghost. They weren't looking for any of this. It just intruded on them. And like he said, even that one agent that ended up just quitting because they cannot wrap their head around coming back to work where they might find themselves witnessing this again. Now, if that doesn't tell you when somebody is traumatized, I don't know what does. Okay? So anyway, I hope that you enjoyed the show. I know I did. I thought it was great. I loved it. To me, this whole, I mean, my imagination is just imagining all these things that he was describing of what he was doing, and all, everything that happened there, and that little girl. Oh, no face. Hello. That, I don't know. I think there's fodder there for a countless nightmarish stories. So I hope you subscribe to my channel. I hope you like this video. I hope you come back next week And when I bring another interesting guest, like I said, I'm lining all the people up from different fields. Because again, I think that the paranormal has so much to offer that really truly is disturbing. Okay? Disturbing in the sense of whether you want to believe it or you don't want to believe it, or you just think it's something that when you read a scary story, if that's the extent that you want to carry it. But I think that the paranormal, that spiritual world parallels right next to us, and every once in a while, like the Ghostbusters, the streams cross. Okay, and then that's when you get people that witness it, and some people have it intrude in their lives and so forth. So I am going to strive very hard to bring, again, interesting guests, and please leave your comments if you like the show, what topics you would like, or authors, or anything that you want to talk about. As a matter of fact, now I'm looking to see if I could find some really interesting UFO stories. I've got a lot of people, but I really want to bring people that have had profound contact with what they believe are extraterrestrial life, which, by the way, a lot of people also believe that UFOs or extraterrestrials are something like what we and Rocky and me were talking about, which is like there's an interdimensional access for them towards us. Okay, and I'm going to do as a matter of fact, I'm also going to do a show where, believe it or not, I had done already one about spirit attachments, where sometimes people under hypnosis have described that what they have, that entity, what they have is an extraterrestrial. It's not a human spirit, it's not a demonic, it's extraterrestrial. And basically they're doing like an investigation. It's really interesting. I'm going to do a whole show on that. But anyway, please come back. And guys, again, thank you for lending me your time. I enjoyed this. Please come back next week and have a great day. Have a great weekend. Take care. See ya. Bye. By the way, I'm going to go now and maybe do a live stream. I'm going to go out at night and check out some animal noises of ghosts, because we've gotten animal killings out in my area. I hope you look at that when I live stream it. Take care. Bye.